There are tons of different stitches that you can pick for machine applique on the Husqvarna Viking Designer EPIC 2. But the most common one is a blanket stitch, which you'll find in menu B for applique stitches, but there's more than just one. And this is why it's so important to stitch out your stitch book. And if you haven't already, please check the link below this YouTube video on how to stitch out the ultimate stitch book. That's taking each of these stitches and figuring out what each of them actually is all about. Why are they different? What makes them different? And so forth. So some are a little heavier version than, say, a different stitch. So just depending on the look that you're after. For example, stitch number 4 in the B menu, there's 2 stitches between each of the little bites. But stitch number 6 just has 1 stitch. And stitch number 9 is a triple version. So that stitch is going to go back and forth and then in, out, in, out. So you don't have to use thicker thread to get a bolder look. Now all the stitches can be made bigger and longer. So again, what stitch you see on the screen in that proportion, that's exactly the size you're going to get. So I always advise that you try the default setting. I do find stitch number 6 is very petite, usually even much smaller than I would want on most fabrics. So it's very small, 2 millimeters wide and 2 millimeters long. You'll find though that by making them the same number long as they are wide, it stays in a nice proportion. Now, it doesn't say that you can't make that longer or maybe a little bit closer together. Let's do the minus version and spread it out. So you can pick what that is to be. I'm going to just touch number 6, put it back to kind of normal. Now, foot A is what's recommended, but I will tell you, you'll find me using most of the time an open toe foot. This is a clear open toe foot that you can purchase separately. It allows you to see where you're going. Now, there is one other thing that I'll show you here on screen, and then I'll do it on the machine once we get it placed, is that there is a red mark in the center of the foot. Well, this stitch currently is sitting in the center of the foot, but that straight line doesn't line up with anything. So one thing that I am going to do is touch the little white bubble here beside the stitch width, and that's like a toggle switch. So when you touch it, it switches, and now you actually have the ability to move the stitch left or right. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to line up that black dot with the red mark on the foot, and it'll be the easiest way to follow around a raw edge to get a perfect stitch every single time. Now you did notice that when we picked stitch number 9, that automatically went all the way to the far right side, so you could use the inside of the toe as a guide, but again, you can touch the little bubble and then move that so that dot is lined up with the red lines. Let's do that, and I'll show you how to even turn a corner. In our Husqvarna Viking Stitching Cosmos online course, I actually used a blanket stitch, not for applique, but just as a decorative stitch. I believe I mirror imaged it, yes, compared to what it shows on screen, as I was stitching around using a circular sewing attachment. So there was a pin sticking up in the center here, and I created those decorative stitches by moving the part further away from the needle. And I did use the thicker one because I wanted it to be bold. That is always a good tip when you want something to show up. Instead of just picking thicker thread, pick a bolder looking stitch. So I know I had some fun by just adding that last little row all the way around a pin tuck block that we had finished with satin stitching as a reverse applique. So if all those terms sound amazing to you and you want to learn how to do those, click the links below this YouTube video. Check out the 10 free videos you can watch for free and see if the Husqvarna Viking Stitching Cosmos course is right for you. So I want to show you that you can see the needle is slightly to the right of center, right from that red mark at the back of the foot. So when I sew, I have to kind of figure out where to guide the fabric. So the straight stitches are coming down, but you can see there's a gap between the edge and the stitch. So what if we did, like we were talking about, moving the needle position over until the needle is right in front of that red line, maybe a hair more. Now I have a great place to keep my eye and run right down keep the raw edge running right down the middle of the foot. I'm watching the kind of the back of the foot where the red mark is. Next, set your machine so the needle stops in the down position. You'll be ready to then pivot when necessary. As you get closer to a corner, this is always the question I get asked, is what do I do? So you're guiding the fabric, plus you're also kind of seeing one stitch ahead. Do I take one more stitch? Do I take two more stitches? And then also you'll notice you need to stop with the needle on the right side of the stitch. So let's go ahead and take that last stitch. Now here I need to really kind of, because I'm close, I need to make sure that that really gets all the way to the end. And if you're close, you can even bring your needle up and then your presser foot up and even kind of fine tune where that stitch is actually going to come down, and you can really get that to take and do the right thing. Let me just kind of, I didn't fuse this down, so I'm going to just give it a little help there. But as you practice, you can find when a stitch needs to actually pivot and when that you need to like take one more stitch, or even bring the needle up and move your fabric just a little bit. But as you can see, you can work your way around corners and curves. So if you're doing curves, you're just moving it little at a time. That's why you'll love this little pivoting feature of it. How about let's just switch over to that thicker version. Now that needle jumps way over there on this side. So how about this? Let's just go ahead and move the fabric to the stitch and you can see the difference. So if running the fabric right along the inside of the clear toe is an option for you, great. Otherwise, let me take those two stitches, there you go. Otherwise, you could bring that needle position back so it is closer to the center here. And just kind of get it relined up. That's why you want to do a little practice no matter what, but you can see how much heavier this stitch is. So depending on what your final look is, you can definitely have some fun altering the stitch and getting it just right. So there's that heavier version versus the lighter version around applique. Applique always takes a little practice, but you've got so many good options in this machine. And don't forget that blanket stitch is not the only way to applique around a piece of fabric. As you'll see in our Stitching Cosmos online course, you watch me stitch with all sorts of different stitches for really what they're not intended for. So do check that out if that is of interest to you. So next up, let's talk about the built-in satin stitches for applique on the Husqvarna Viking Designer EPIC 2.